I had time to consider things as I fell. I had tried to activate the enchantments that would normally slow my fall, but whatever this shaft I was now descending in was, seemed to be a magically null place. It was also dark. Dark in the way that only the deep underground can be. So dark you could swear you could see shapes within it. This exam was not going the way I had envisioned, and I was beginning to question the wisdom of my choice, before dismissing the thought with a laugh. Nothing worth the effort should ever be easy. I could hear those words from so long ago, so very clearly as I fell in that dark silence. I fell through that dark for over 500 feet, 536 to be exact, before I struck the bottom of the shaft at full force, and immediately and thankfully lapsed into unconsciousness immediately, my mind, my body, shutting down to attempt to preserve my life in a mending sleep. When I woke up and took stock of my situation, I found that at least a week had passed. I moved slowly and found my body had indeed mended itself within that time. Pausing and feeling, I could detect the reduction of material within my base stock reserves. I sighed heavily. It would take nearly a decade to regrow those reserves, but their use had allowed my body to rebuild and reform itself from that massive impact. I also found that there was, on a ledge about 100 foot up, a door set in the wall. It appeared to be made of star metal, and had a small panel next to it. Looking around more, I saw the floor of this shaft had once been a bed of sharp obsidian spikes and pillars, but now, after ages of things being thrown in, was mostly piles of rotted bone and corroding and rusting metals. Only one or two of the spikes remained in any sort of state, and none of those were whole. Bending over, I took a broken tip of one of those obsidian spikes, some 2 or 3 feet in length, and stored it in my pack as I continued to look around. The walls were smooth, but were of a soft stone. This allowed me to ascend to the ledge by using climbing claws, and provided a good workout after the long time spent in a healing sleep. Putting away my climbing gloves after making it to the ledge, and looking at the door, I was unsure just how old it was, as star metal neither rusts nor corrodes in any way. The panel was sized for larger individuals, and was set near where the head of a human would be. The runes on the panel were annular, which didn't help much with identification. This entire island was a creation of the annular, but I had heard no mention of them having underground facilities on it. However, the annular are an independent lot in many ways. and one having themselves a hidden place in such a remote location would not be at all a surprise. Fortunately, the door was not locked and simply opened when I pressed the correct rune. Lights flickered on and a breeze came from within, the air at first smelling very, very old. For only a moment or two, until the magics and other features inside cleaned the air, as this place seemed to wake up from its own long slumber. As I walked in and began to explore, I could quickly see that this was indeed some sort of personal lab and research facility. I had entered a modest, by NLR standards, living area, complete with several volumes of fiction and many, many books filled with many handwritten notes. I took my time to read them all and learned the reasons that this place existed for, and began to feel quite uneasy about that purpose as I read on. Among the first of the notebooks was the following passage. The powers of these flame forged are indeed a threat to us, my brothers and sisters. However, I continue to say the greater threat is these weapons that the scaled freaks are giving onto them. These Tel-Drakes and Wyrms cannot be allowed to live, for they would allow the lesser races to have far too much mobility and communication. We can only maintain our holy duty and hold of things if we keep the lessers too busy with their own spats to gather what is happening. Further on, in a different book, I found this note. I welcome the Lord Protector's interest into my continuation of our lost brother Lifespinner's work, and I shall prove how his great work can be used for a greater creation that can be used to bring us bloodless victory in this war. By these entries, it was clear that this place was very old indeed. This could only be referring to the wars of Feather and Scale, and laid bare the level of enmity of those involved. The mention of Lifespinner is curious. At this point in history, he would have been with the Expedis Primus, and as far as I was aware, he had had no impact or influence on the wars because of that. The Tel-Drakes and Wyrms, however, I was aware of. They are very rare, having only been introduced to the realms in the ending years of the last age. I had heard they were from much older origins than that, and these books seemed to confirm that. As I read on, I learned why this was. Brothers and sisters of the NLR, I celebrate your victories. By successfully sealing away the roots of these foul things, they will be both kept away from the lessers, and without provoking the direct ire of those same lessers. The genius of it, if they never knew about them in the first place, they will never miss them. Cheers, my brothers. However, While I understand the Lord Protector's feelings that this matter is now settled, I am going to finish what I started and use this facility to create a counter to those foul things. I have been given the last of the 13 primal eggs of those accursed beasts. And by the end of this, I will have a beast that will be able to hunt them when they inevitably escape their ceiling, no matter how far ahead in this war that may be. I intend to be finished before I answer the call to join the Dakwa Council as a full member in but a few months. By the 9 and 4, welcome once more to the library, where today we are going to look at one of the gifts to the mortal races. This one from the elder race of dragonkind, the twin species of Tel-Drakes and Wyrms. Now, as always, my perceptive patrons, this is going to be a brief overview on these interesting and long forgotten and perhaps missed creatures. Now, they are only recently discovered and are still a rare sight across the realms. These creatures were originally intended to be companions and aids to the younger races. As mentioned, gifted to the younger races by the elder race of dragons, or rather, they were intended to be gifted. That is, before the Analar interfered. We'll get back to that in a moment. They were crafted and intended to allow the younger races to more easily move and connect with each other, and to give the mostly land-bound younger races a viable answer and solution to the numerous flying threats that existed within the realms, the least of which, notwithstanding, being the Analar and the dragons themselves. The two variants of creatures are of the same base stock, but were engineered for differing sizes and differing purposes. Starting with the smaller of the two, the so-called Tel-Drakes are roughly the size of an average house cat, and have a similar independent mindset and mischievous nature when they are not performing a task or otherwise left to their own devices. However, when they are performing a task for their owner, they are far more like the most trained and disciplined hounds in their dedication and focus in the execution of their tasks. Bearing the colors and textures of all the various kinds of dragons in various patterns, the scale and texture of Tel-Drakes have no distinction in discerning their abilities, unlike their progenitors, the dragons. They have two rear claws, paired with a front set of forelimbs that are wings. They have a long tail, which is tipped with a large, wicked-looking barb. However, this barb is in actuality insubstantial, and it is used to link with the person that is not the owner of the Tel-Drake to deliver a message or to receive a message to carry on. Paired with their limited teleportation ability, Tel-Drakes are able to jump to the location of either their owner or to another Tel-Drake that they are familiar with. This allows Tel-Drakes to hop around and serve as the base for rapid conveyance of information, and do it securely. By contrast to the fairly consistently sized Tel-Drakes, Wyrms range from the size of a pony to that of a large werebull. And we're talking base body size, not wings, neck, head, and tail, all proportionate, fairly long. They do tend to walk on their rear legs while using their front limbs to either manipulate items or to balance themselves. They also have a pair of wings that is more than capable of lifting both the warpworm and their rider easily. Similar to their smaller cousins, they displayed patterns and colors drawn from all the various forms of dragons in existence, while none of these dictating at all the abilities or strength of the warpworm. They are more cognitive than Tel-Drakes, more intelligent, but are just as bound to their owners. However, they are capable of reasoning for themselves and have their own personalities. They are universally telepathic with any intelligent creature within a short range. However, this telepathic communication with their owner has no limit with its range. Like their smaller cousins, they are capable of teleporting, but unlike their smaller cousins, this requires a specially prepared alchemical reagent to fuel that must be consumed. And unlike the Tel-Drakes, which can teleport to a familiar sibling or other Tel-Drake or back to its master, warpworms are dependent on the knowledge of the rider, their owner, to target their jump. Also, the amount of the reagent required varies on distance and other factors, but can be reduced by having multiple warpworms jump together, each adding to the other's abilities. Now, it should be stated, it is unclear exactly how these gifts were meant to be used. As hinted before, the Analar got in the way. Shocker, I know. Using methods unknown and most likely related to vast amounts of gracing, they were able to capture and seal away the original specimens and the original stocks of eggs before they could be given to the lesser races. And yes, that's what they used to call them, the lesser races. No ego problem with the Analar. Moving on. However, the sealing location was discovered by the Zero-Brithian High Council. These creatures, via the help of that same High Council, slowly began to build their numbers up within the nation of Zero-Brinth, before beginning to spread across the realms as they were intended to be, under programs of distribution and protection, spearheaded by the Zero-Brithian High Council. One of the issues with Tel-Drakes and warpworms and their propagation across the realms is that the creatures telepathically bond at hatching, or just before in all technicality, with their owner and master. And the eggs will not hatch if there is not an acceptable candidate nearby. However, if there are no matches for an egg when it is ready to hatch, it will end up rotting. Now, the details of the breeding and expansion programs vary, but so far these most interesting of creatures are beginning to be seen more and more regularly, which would seem to indicate the program's successful nature. How these gifts, once denied to the realms and now resurgent, will factor into the growing future of the realms remains to be seen. And with this quick look at these wondrous creatures done, and before you return to the library, my perceptive patrons, allow me to once again thank you, as always, for your time and attention. It does mean the world to me. Now, by the 9 and 4, be well, take care of yourselves and each other. As I continued reading, I had been forced to contain countless instances of rage and revulsion. So vile were the acts described within these tomes, so giddily and unhumanely. The notes detailed this twisted Analar's experiments on the first 11 of these primal eggs, each more twisted and debauched than the previous, each a failure. The notes ended before the last 2 eggs were covered. As I stood up, I had to take a breath and shake my head to clear the images that were now burned into my perfect memory. I moved towards the deeper lab and whatever was hidden within. A few minutes and a couple of door locks bypassed with codes contained within the notes later. I found myself outside what was obviously the main lab door, and discovered I was hesitant to actually see what was behind this door.
"Please don't be worried, Optor,"
a voice in my mind, yet coming from behind me. I turned to look at the speaker. He was about 2 foot tall and looked like an Analar in miniature, save for his face, which was decidedly draconic in look. A warm smile was on his face, with an eager and earnest demeanor. "Who are you?" I asked cautiously. He seemed to take a moment to consider the question, then looked at me with curiosity in his eye, as if some query or question had made itself known to him.
"You are strong. You're the first to survive the fall. I hear the yells. It wakes me from my slumber. And then the sounds of landing. Then nothing. Then I go back to sleep. But I didn't hear you fall at all. You didn't scream, did you?"
No, I did not. But once more, who are you, little one? More consideration on his face, and then a soft smile.
"I am what's left of the Maker fused with his creation, and now I am whole."
I considered this and turned to the lab door. "Care to open the door for me, then?"
Oh, of course, Optor."
Then the little man flew to the door and it slid open automatically. I followed him in and saw on a dais in the center of the room a large egg, about the size of a wolf curled up to sleep. It was suspended in some kind of stasis field. There was also a console that contained records of what this egg was and how it was made. The Analar had taken the last 2 eggs, manipulated and fused them together to implant a control interface link that would allow the resultant being to be controlled via a third biomechanical neck and head, which would contain an imprint of this Analar's mind. I shook in revulsion to the violation of spirit and body and mind.
"It didn't work out as he planned. Even in stasis, that being's simple and wholesome nature fused with the imprint, and I am the result. And, funny, You're the first person I've ever known the name of, Optor.
That stopped me. How did this creature know my name? Then it hit me. I knew his name too. You are Tranos, and I can only assume that that means... He was bobbing up and down giddily as I was figuring things out.
Yep, Optor. We are one. Now, can we please leave? I'm tired of napping all the time.
Almost without thinking, I turned to free Tranos and turned off the console. As soon as I turned off the stasis fields, the egg shattered, and there stood a two-headed, draconic form, with a body the size of a dire wolf, both heads looking at me with the joy of a hound whose master had just come home.
That is not inaccurate,
Tranos said, as he floated between the two heads and faded, leaving behind the biomechanical head and neck. In the space between the original two heads, the base of the neck connected to a metal port in that space. The entire creature shivered.
Ooh, that is a fun feeling,
Tranos joyfully said, wiggling his body and shaking it for the first time. He then blinked out of existence, and I could then hear him howling happily from the original room I was in. Another sound of teleportation and more snickering and howls of joy from another part of the facility. After a few more minutes, Tranos was sitting in front of me, looking up at me with 3 large smiles.
So, can we go now, Optor? Please, can we go, Optor?
The tone of his voice in my mind had an infectious joy. Of course, so long as you are able to fly a rope up for me to climb out of here. I was eager to leave this place behind me. Tranos' 3 heads all cocked to the side while looking at me, before he leaped onto my chest with great force, knocking me to the ground. However, I hit upon dirt and not metal lab floor as I fell. Tranos had blinked us to the surface, and, having done so, collapsed upon my chest. His 2 normal heads were softly snoring, and the 3rd head looked at me, his voice sleepy in my mind.
That was hard. Nap now.
With that, Tranos fell asleep, snoring and twitching softly. We were lying under the branches of a great oak tree, and I too allowed myself to drift into a light sleep, trying to process all that had just happened. This indeed was not how I thought things would be going at all. However, looking down at Tranos and feeling his simple joy and contentment, I knew I had no complaints with this part.